Stephanie, we talked about how unhappy people are in the United States and how we are no longer one of the top 20 countries in the World Happiness Report. And no matter how much people want to twist the narrative, like realistically, this can all be attributed to the Biden administration policies that have negatively affected the majority of Americans. And then yesterday, I see this article that was published on PBS NewsHour, and it was saying that 1 in 5 adults believe that Americans may have to resort to violence to get our country back. And this information comes from poll results that were taken in a survey conducted last week. And of course, PBS is like an incredibly left-leaning outlet. So the whole tone of the article was like, it's the Republicans who want violence, and it's all because of Trump and his crazy anti-democracy rhetoric, that people are feeling this way because Trump's disinformation campaign tactic is conjuring fear and manipulating people's emotions and sabotaging the country. And these poll results are like showing that his propaganda strategies are working. So now the left has to start pushing back. And then, like, as always, it's the fucking pot calling the kettle black because we all know it's Biden's policies and not Trump's that have fucked up our country. But I want to talk about the actual poll results. So one of the questions was, do Americans have to resort to violence to get the country back on track? And the overall vote across the political spectrum was 20% of people saying yes. Now that was 12% Democrats, 28% Republicans, and 18% independents. But I think the more interesting part of the survey was the question, has the country gotten so far off track that it needs a leader willing to break the rules? And the results of this were that 41% of Americans said yes. And the breakdown was 56% Republican, 28% Democrat, and 37% independent. So those are fairly significant numbers across the political spectrum, right? And then other results of the poll said 51% of overall Americans think immigrants who enter our country illegally should be deported. 2/3 of Americans believe our country has become too politically correct. And 47% of Americans believe discrimination against white people has become as much of a problem as discrimination against Black people and other minorities. Now, we've talked about this before. We know polls are subjective to the audience that's being polled and the political narrative of the polling agency. And like I said, PBS is definitely a left-leaning corporation. And they reported in this same poll that like one of the questions they asked was, if the election was today, would you vote for Biden or Trump? And 50% of people said Biden, which like doesn't even remotely reflect numbers being shown in any other poll across the country. But I'm bringing this up because this poll shows clear dissatisfaction across the country, regardless of political beliefs, in terms of people being unhappy with the direction our country has taken, which again was supported by the research that we talked about on Wednesday. And so today we just want to talk about the effects of some of Biden's recent policies and actions that are contributing to the continual erosion of our freedoms and independence. And Stephanie, I want to start with one this week that totally infuriated me. So on Wednesday, the Biden admin decided not to buy 3 million barrels of oil to replenish our strategic petroleum reserves. And just to remind everybody, Biden drained a huge majority of our reserves back in 2022 after his failed policies made gas prices soar across the country. And to put that in context, at the end of 2020, we had around 638 million barrels of oil. Biden released over 180 million barrels in 2021 and 2022, several million of which, by the way, went to China. And we currently have around 363 million barrels in reserve, which maybe sounds like not a lot, but it's not. It's literally the lowest our reserves have been in 40 years. And we're at such a critical time when like World War III is approaching our doorstep constantly, and there's all this turmoil going on in the Middle East right now. So why did the Biden admin pass up on filling our reserves? Well, the answer is because the price is too high, and the Department of Energy is, quote, keeping the taxpayers' interest at the forefront of its decision-making, end quote. Because that's what the Biden admin always has in mind, right? The taxpayers' interest. This is why all of our tax dollars are going to Ukraine and not our own borders. It's fucking laughable. And especially because just a couple weeks ago, that nut job, DOE Secretary Jennifer Granholm, she said that our reserves will be refilled by the end of the year. Stephanie, with the conflicts going on in the Middle East, like I highly doubt the price of oil is going to come down anytime soon. Like, don't you think this is insane?
Oh, it's totally insane. And when I hear stuff like that, I picture KJP's voice. I'm like, is she the one making the decisions? Because it's so fucking stupid. It's like, I can't imagine anyone with any experience or knowledge of anything making a decision like this. Like you pointed out, the Biden administration has no qualms about sending billions of dollars to Ukraine and continuing to fund these never ending wars as long as it takes, according to Biden. But how is it that they won't refill our oil reserves? And especially at a time where we're at such a great risk of global conflict. It's like we're constantly talking about how World War III could literally break out at any moment where we might need those reserves. And not only that, but I just thought about this when you were talking, they're saying that one of the biggest threats is like a cyber attack or an EMP or look at these bridges that are collapsing that are going to hurt our supply chain when it comes to gas and oil and everything else. So I would say now more than ever would be the most important time to fill up those reserves. So it's like, who is making this decision and are they just stupid or are they intentionally trying to hurt the country? Right.
Yeah.
Here's something interesting though. You want to know what they are spending money on? They're funding a train on the moon. Like I shit you not. This is real. You can look it up. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So at a time where we have Americans struggling to afford just the basics, gas, food, housing, we can pay to have a railway system put on the motherfucking moon. Like what? And so, according to an Aviation Week article, Northrop Grumman won DARPA's bid to study the concept for a lunar railroad. And like, I wish I were making this up. And no article, I looked and looked and looked, no article would say how much the bid was for. So, if any of our listeners know how to like look up those bids, I'm sure we could research it. I would love to know because I'm sure it's astronomical, but it's like, are you kidding me? Like, you're not going to fill our oil reserves, but we're going to spend funding on just like looking into this concept of building a railroad on the moon. Like, how insanely stupid is that?
Oh my God. I can't. Like, is this shit even real? You
I
know, is it
know.
even
Like, don't you
real?
feel like they're just messing with us? It's like at this point, are they just like, is this one big psychological experiment? Because it's like, you can't even believe it. It's so
Yeah.
outrageous.
We are living in the matrix.
Yeah.
We just are. Okay, well, but there's this too. So, we have this continual push by the Biden admin for the environmental regulations and Biden's whole climate agenda and going green with electric vehicles and completely unsustainable policies, which are now going to have even more of an impact on our supply chain and the cost of and availability of like goods and services, and probably put a lot of long haul and short haul truckers out of business. Because last Friday, the EPA finalized regulations targeting emissions generated from heavy duty vehicles. This is specifically like trucks and buses. And these regulations are being called the strongest ever greenhouse gas emission standards. And these new rules will take effect starting in 2026. So that's less than 2 years away. It's going to require trucks and buses to be fully zero emissions compliant by 2032. So I want to play this clip from Fox News about how this is going to play out for the American people.
Sure, all good points. Joey, I want to get you on this quote from the Owner Operator Independent Drivers Association. It goes on to say this administration seems dead set on regulating every local mom and pop business out of existence with its flurry of unworkable environmental mandates. I mean, that's what this is about, isn't it?
Yeah. So quick thing on trucking. So a truck driver makes his money on time and miles. The quicker he can get back from a load, the quicker he can pick up the next one. And it's basically a gig job over and over again, whether he's an independent contractor, which most of them are, or working for a trucking company. So he's driving their truck. So it's a big thing to not cost these drivers more time. They can only drive for about 11 hours at a time. They take a 30-minute break at 8 hours, and that helps stretch that out a little bit for them. And the reason why that's important is, let me give you some stats on the electric trucks available now. A Kenworth can go for 150 miles, and it takes 125 minutes to charge. Peterbilt can go for 150 miles, 120 minutes to charge. You have to go all the way down through 3 other manufacturers to get to a Tesla semi. They can go 500 miles, and they say it'll charge up to 70% in 30 minutes. A truck today, a diesel truck, can go 900 to 2,100 miles full of fuel. So what this would do to truck drivers, not just truck drivers, but think about all the perishable items. Why can you eat strawberries in the wintertime? Because somebody's going to bring them from California. You can't do that with perishable items if it's taken 3 times as long to get here. Medical items, all types of things. You do not understand, when you try to impose a rule like this, how far behind technology is and how reliant we are. I don't think this is anything that could actually go into effect, but then we see that, I mean, as recently as last week, they are putting some of this in effect.
I very much like eating strawberries in the wintertime. So, okay, David, I want to pull up these stats. This is the number of trucks on the road right now versus the number of electric trucks. It's staggering. 12 plus million on the road right now for regular trucks. Less than 13,000 are electric trucks. 2027. Why?
Because it's ideology. On Easter weekend, I guess it's a good thing to talk about a new religion called climate change. They're the real deniers of facts. Look, if you take a truck, a 70,000-pound long hauler, and you add the battery and all the other things to it, now you're adding 10 to 20,000 pounds, which wears out the tires faster, the brakes faster. Actually, it turns out that because, like electric cars, they're heavier, they actually have a bigger carbon footprint than an actual real car, as in a petrol one. But this will also kill the industry. The fact is, they don't care about whether it's right or wrong. They're pushing an ideology and a dogma, and the industry will never convert. No matter what they say, it will not work.
Well, and at least that's what's on my mind, is it, what would this do to the livelihoods of so many people?
Well, and also, what would it do to the power grid and all of the upgrades that need to happen with these massive chargers? I mean, this is a long road to walk slowly on an electric vehicle.
Okay, so basically, as like the first guy you heard was like owner operator. He's like a 30-year truck driver named Mike Nichols. And he was earlier explaining, EV trucks don't do as much work. They're heavier. They can't haul as much. They don't go as far. They take too long to charge, which means in order to keep up with supply and demand, they need to put more trucks on the road, which totally defeats the purpose, right? And you heard in that video, like a typical diesel semi truck, actually semi, has a range of, they said 900, but I read somewhere also between 1,500 and 2,000 miles on one tank of fuel. And the average EV has below 350 miles before it has to be charged. And the only one that comes anywhere close to any kind of charge is a Tesla, which would be 500 miles. So according to the International Council on Clean Transportation, the average EV truck costs around $300,000. I've had 3 cups of coffee. I'm in my usual tongue-tied mode. Okay, but what does a diesel model cost? Maybe half that, maybe half on average. The American Trucking Association estimates that in 2022, trucks transported 11.5 billion tons of freight, which is the equivalent of about 72% of the total tonnage that was shipped nationwide. And currently, less than 1% of new truck sales in the United States are zero emissions. But these new standards kick in like less than 2 years, and they're expecting full compliance in 8 years. Like, it's unfeasible. And according to the Renewable Energy Laboratory, the United States would need 28 million charging points by 2030 to meet these electrification goals, and we currently only have 160,000. And Stephanie, we know the power grid cannot possibly support this. You heard them mention that in the clip, and this Fox News article also referenced a study that was done in December of 2022 by the American Transportation Research Institute, which determined that full electrification of the U.S. transportation sector would require a minimum 40% increase in generation and transmission capacity compared to our current grid. And finally, this is not just impacting long and short haul truckers that we depend on for much of our food supply and transportation of goods. These new regulations will impact school buses, public transit buses, garbage trucks, construction equipment like concrete trucks, emergency equipment like fire trucks and other emergency vehicles. How can this be looked at as anything other than complete lunacy, number one, and intentional destruction of our supply chain on the part of the Biden admin?
Well, here's where my conspiracy brain is going. Like sometimes these things don't hit me until I hear you like talking about it. And then I'm like, oh, okay, look at what they did to individual farmers. They are pretty much non-existent at this point, right? They made it so expensive and put so many regulations into place that you have these huge mega corporations and billionaires that now control our food supply, right? Well, what's the next stage in that? It's the truckers that are bringing the food, that are transporting it. How do you take control of that industry where Joey pointed out in that clip that most of these truckers are individuals? Well, you make it impossible. You put all these regulations in place. You make the truck a minimum of $300,000 that they need so that these people drop out, so that the big corporations that all of these politicians are probably invested in can take over the trucking industry. Now you have a complete monopoly and complete control over another part of our supply chain. Not to mention, we just had that Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, which we know is going to cause a huge disruption in our supply chain. They said it's going to take at least 5 years to rebuild it. Okay. So it's like to add this nonsense on top of that, again, it's either completely idiotic or it's very intentional. And think about this, like if we know that gas, oil, diesel, all of that is going to be disrupted because of the bridge collapse, wouldn't that be a perfect time to roll out like, oh, well, the other option is electric. We can go electric. And you know what I mean? And so I have to bring up this conspiracy point real quick. And it's very out there, but I just have to mention it. I can't help myself. Okay, so it's about the Francis Scott Key Bridge. So Francis Scott Key was the guy that wrote our national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. So very like, this is a patriotic bridge, right? The cargo ship that collapsed the bridge was called the Dali, which in Sanskrit, I found out means divided or broken. So you have the Dali, which means broken, that rammed in and broke and divided the bridge that represents our national anthem. Like, how crazy is that? Like, if that's not some symbolism, I don't know what is. I just thought that was so crazy when I heard it. And yes, it's a conspiracy, you guys, but I have fun with this stuff, so bear with me. I had to bring it up. But anyhow, since you brought up this electric stuff and it has to do with the climate agenda nonsense, I have to play a clip that I came across that I think is the best takedown ever of the climate crazies. You're going to love this, Tara. So this is the president of the Caribbean country called Guyana. And I want to play how he puts this ridiculous BBC reporter to shame. So take a listen to this. You're going to love it.
Take a big picture look at what's going on here. Over the next decade, 2 decades, it is expected that there will be $150 billion worth of oil and gas extracted off your coast. It's an extraordinary figure, but think of it in practical terms. That means, according to many experts, more than 2 billion tons of carbon emissions will come from your seabed, from those reserves, and be released into the atmosphere. I don't know if you as a head of state went to the COP in Dubai.
Let me stop you right there. Do you know that Guyana has a forest forever that is the size of England and Scotland combined? A forest that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon, a forest that we have kept alive a forest that we have kept alive.
Does that give you the right?
No,
Does
no,
that
no,
give you
that-
the right to release
that
all
give
of this
you the right-
carbon
Does
from?
that give you the right to lecture us on climate change? I am going to lecture you on climate change because we have kept this forest alive that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon that you enjoy, that the world enjoy, that you don't pay us for, that you don't value, that you don't see a value in, that the people of Guyana has kept alive. Guess what? We have the lowest deforestation rate in the world. And guess what? Even with our greatest exploration of the oil and gas resource we have now, we will still be net zero. Guyana will still be net zero. With all our exploration,
A couple of
we'll
points.
still be net zero. No, there's no,
Powerful words, Mr. President. But
I am not completed as yet. I am not finished as yet. I am just not finished as yet. Because this is the hypocrisy that exists in the world. The world in the last 50 years has lost 65% of all its biodiversity. We have kept our biodiversity. Are you valuing it? Are you ready to pay for it? When is the developed world going to pay for it? Or are you in the pockets? Are you in the pockets of those who have damaged the environment? Are you in the pockets? Are you and your system in the pockets of those who destroyed the environment through the Industrial Revolution and now lecturing us? Are you in their pockets? Are you paid by them? Are you here to give their
Mr.
message?
President. Let's take a
Was that not the best ever? Like, I love this guy. He was not letting him get away with that ridiculous question.
That was shots fired right there.
Yeah, and he's absolutely right. It's like why don't we ever hear about these climate agenda people or the Biden administration talking about planting more trees?
Because we're
Like,
trying
yeah,
to bury them, right? Aren't we? Isn't there like
oh,
a whole agenda
Bill
to
Gates
get up
wants to
and
chop
bury
them
the
down and
tree?
bury them. Yeah,
Yeah.
like makes no sense because that would, like he said, like they're still going to be net zero because they have this massive forest. Well, why? Because it's not profitable, right? They don't have investments in trees, but they do have investments in electric vehicles and everything that goes into them. It's
Yep.
the biggest scam of all. And I can't believe at this point that there are people that are still falling for this BS.
Yeah, I actually like really love that clip. He just put him in
No.
his place so well. And like, how do you argue that? You can't argue it.
Yeah, and he like totally flipped it around. He's like, "How
I
about
know.
you pay me because this is
Yeah,
benefiting you?" I mean, talk about like, man, if everyone could talk like that guy, the world would be a different place. That's for
no
sure.
kidding. All right, let's talk about housing, Stephanie, because I saw an article this week in the Washington Times and it was talking about how Americans are increasingly living in their cars because people can't afford housing. And the author was comparing today's situation to what happened during the Great Depression in the 1930s with people like living in shanty towns that they built from scrap construction supplies. And these were called Hoovervilles after President Hoover during the time. And so today we're approaching the point of creating the same problem with Bidenvilles instead of Hoovervilles because so many people are unable to afford housing under Biden's policies and the way he's completely fucked our economy. And apparently, things are so bad in Sedona, Arizona, that the city council recently set aside a parking lot. And this parking lot is going to be exclusively for people who work in the city who live in their cars because they can't afford to rent or buy a home. And the problem has gotten so bad that the city is even installing toilets in the parking lot for people to use because they'd rather do that than tackle the housing crisis. And Sedona, Arizona has always been a fairly decent upscale community, but it was also affordable for the middle class. And like that's completely changed. The average cost of a home there is close to $1 million. There's no housing available for the middle class or working class people who live and work there because the only homes available are rentals, like luxury homes for wealthy people looking to go on vacation. And we talked about this on Wednesday about how the vast majority of young people today can't afford to purchase a home and they feel like they'll never be able to. And you have so many young people who are living with their parents because they can't even find like affordable rental properties these days. And the article totally confirms what we were saying on that episode. And so I want to quote exactly from the article. It said, inflation has pushed rents so much that young Americans are moving back in with their parents at rates not seen since the Great Depression because they can't make it on their own. Sometimes they can't even make it with multiple roommates. Many people cannot move back in with their family, so the car it is. The monthly mortgage payment on a median priced home has doubled since January 2021. Fucking doubled in 2 years. And rents are at record highs. Like the Great Depression, this disaster stems from impolitic public policy. For the last several years, the government has spent, borrowed, and created trillions of dollars it didn't have. The predictable results of this oh my gosh, I can't say this word. Profligacy? Profligacy.
Oh,
that it?
I've never heard that word.
I haven't either, and I was an English major. Sorry,
That's a new
guys.
one.
Okay, well, the result of this is runaway inflation, followed by equally foreseeable interest rate increases. The deadly combination of high prices and high interest rates has frozen the housing market and reduced home ownership affordability metrics to near record lows. In several major metropolitan areas, it takes more than 100% of the median household after-tax income to afford a median-priced home. Since rents and virtually all other prices have risen so much faster than incomes over the last 3 years, even renting is unaffordable today. So many people have to go into debt just to keep a roof over their heads. And for some, that's a car roof. This is the kind of story you might expect from a third world country or somewhere behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War, not the largest economy in the world, end quote. And Stephanie, it's like you were saying on Wednesday, if you hadn't bought your home in Florida before Biden came to office, you probably wouldn't have been able to afford it now. And the same thing with me when I bought my house in Texas, that was in 2021. And even then, it cost me more than double the price that my home had sold for a year and a half earlier. And this administration has just completely fucked the possibility for people to even achieve the basic American dream of homeownership.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's not just that they can't afford to buy a home. Rent is more expensive than a mortgage.
Yeah.
Like it's insane what the prices are here. Like I've looked it up just because I've been curious. And like a one bedroom, even a studio is at least 2,000 a month here in like the Tampa area. It's crazy. And it's at the point where I just don't know how we don't have a housing market crash because I don't see how people are going to continue to be able to afford these crazy big mortgages. Like, I think people are probably getting in over their heads, just like they did prior to the 2008 crash. And then you have salaries that are not going up with inflation, and budgets are just getting tighter and tighter. And so it's like, what the heck? But then there's, the conspiracy aspect of it. If no one can afford a home or rent, well, then there's always 15-minute cities that can come to the rescue, right? And so it's like you have to wonder again, is this just idiotic or is this part of the agenda? And I totally forgot about this. I should have looked up the info, but maybe we could do an episode on it that BlackRock was buying up a lot of homes all over the country to purposely drive up the home values. And they got caught, and like the government, I think Congress was going to act on it. And I don't know where that went, but that was just like another driving factor. So again, it makes you wonder, like, what's the real agenda here? What do these elites want to accomplish with this? And I want to bring up another point, like not to get us totally off topic, but when we were talking about this episode, I thought of something that I feel like it's not brought up that often, but it has to do with Biden and just like another big way in which he's failing not just ordinary people, but like his own party. And so it's how Biden is like actually really hurt the LGBTQ community. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up and it was on my mind is because there was someone surprisingly, like the last person I thought would bring up this point was Chris Cuomo. I don't know what's up with Chris Cuomo, but like he went on Tucker's podcast.
Yeah.
He went on the PBD podcast, which was where I heard him talking about this. But he was talking about how Biden has done nothing but like absolutely hurt this community. And the reason it all came up is they were talking about like that outrage that you had brought up the other day, Tara, about Biden focusing on like Trans Visibility Day instead of Easter. And he said that Biden has hurt the trans community because you can't help a minority community by making it the opposition of the majority. And I was like, holy shit, like that is such a good point because that's exactly what he's done. I feel like with every demographic, like not just the LGBTQ community, but every demographic. And like, remember back when we had conservative Ant on the podcast and like he was saying how, you know, people pretty much left him alone and like were mostly accepting of the gay community up until this whole like LGBTQ agenda started. And that it's actually made people who used to be very accepting take a step back and kind of like put their guard up. And then the people who weren't tolerant before, like instead of just, you know, staying quiet, now they're like fueled with even more hate. And I was like, this is just another way in which like he is destroying what took decades to build in this country. So it's like, you know, there's that aspect. And then the other thing that I was thinking about was how he has weaponized the federal government. And obviously, like we see it every day with him going after Trump. I mean, he's literally trying to like go after his political opponent criminally, right? Then we know what happened with the Twitter files. We covered that. Well, now RFK Jr. has actually won a court battle proving that Biden is weaponizing the federal government. So I came across a clip this morning right before we recorded, and I want to play it because it brings up, if I could find it, it brings up this battle and like he kind of lays it out on how Biden has weaponized the federal government against all kinds of people since the very first day he took office.
I think it's a debate that Americans ought to have because and the reason for that, but there's a couple of reasons, but I just won a case in the Court of Appeals against President Biden for censoring political speech. This is the first time in American history that presidents have been ordering media outlets to censor criticism of their administrations or censor speech by their political opponents. And that's very dangerous to democracy. What the federal court findings show that 37 hours after he took the oath of office, President Biden's top staff at their White House was meeting with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Google, and putting in place portals that the White House could control and that they did turn over to the CIA, the FBI, CISA, the IRS, and the health agencies, CDC and NIH, to criticize speech that they didn't like, all kinds of speech, some on health, some on the mandates, the COVID mandates, some on the Ukraine war. So this, you know, Hamilton, Madison, Adams said that we put freedom of expression into the First Amendment because all of the other rights are dependent on that. If you have a government that can silence its opponents, it has license for any atrocity. The other thing that President Biden has done is to weaponize the federal agencies to politicize them. And, you know, I personally have had experience with this, with the Secret Service denial. So, you know, I've had many, many credible threats against me since I began this campaign. I'm the first presidential campaign in history to be denied Secret Service protection that has requested it. They've given 44 campaigns Secret Service protection before the 120-day cutoff. So legally, they have to give me Secret Service protection 120 days before the general election. But in the past, there's been 44 other candidates who have had much less popularity than me, much lower in the poll numbers, and yet they were given Secret Service protection a year or almost 2 years in advance. My uncle Teddy received it 551 days in advance. And it's a way of politicizing the federal agencies to harm your political opponents. we've seen prosecutors and court cases used by the administration to try to exclude me from the ballot, to try to exclude President Trump, Cornel West from the ballot. Right. When I was a kid.
So he's absolutely right. Like, this is
Yeah.
the first time in American history that a president is censoring his political opponents. This is like third world stuff. And I think it's really important that we realize that. Like, this is not normal. There's some young people that might think this is just how politics goes. No, it's not. This is absolutely not normal.
This is how politics goes in a socialist or communist country.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, I've said it before and I'm going to keep saying it between now and November. Like, what everyone should be looking at when it comes to choosing a president is two things: the economy and national security. Who's going to keep the economy running and help the taxpayers with lower taxes, lower cost of goods, more jobs? And then who's going to keep us out of war? And without a doubt, Trump is that guy. Just look at the actions that each president has taken. Biden has screwed us so badly on every issue, but nothing's as bad as what he has done with inflation, our border, and then the mess that he's made on the global stage. And that's what we need to focus on with a president. Leave the social issues for Congress, for your local state representatives, and leave the economy and national security to the presidents. Who's going to do a better job? Hands down, Trump. And I don't think that we have to look at any polls or reports or statistics to know that our lives were better under Trump than under Biden.
Yeah, 100%. And on top of that, like you mentioned, keeping us out of war. And obviously, one of the big topics that's still ongoing is funding the war in Ukraine. And I want to play a clip from Tucker recently did an interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene this morning, actually, it came out. And for most of the interview, they were talking about Mike Johnson and how he's sold out the Republican Party and he's caving and making a deal with the Senate right now to send another insane amount of money to Ukraine, even though 70% of the country has made it clear we don't want to keep sending money for this proxy war that like Ukraine cannot win. And honestly, like I'm so disappointed in Mike Johnson. And all I can assume is the elites have to be threatening him or they have something on him because he has completely gone back on his word about putting the southern border first and not giving money to Ukraine. And apparently, this whole deal is supposed to come out like when Congress gets back from their recess. And Marjorie Taylor Greene had a lot to say about it, and she brought up a lot of stuff that I had no idea was even happening. But the clip that I want to play is actually from the end of the interview with Tucker because she talks about something that we say on this podcast all the time, and that's the power of the people.
Mike Johnson and his friends. So last question, is this actually going to happen? Will this funding go through with Mike Johnson leading the charge after recess?
Yes, everything that I've seen, everyone that I've talked to is this is happening next week. He's going to suspend the rules. He's going to bring it to the floor for a vote. Every Democrat is going to wear their blue and yellow lapel pins and flags and scarves, and they're going to vote to fund that. And we're going to have, a percentage of our Republicans that actually support it will vote to fund it. And it will pass in the House. It will pass in the House. It'll go to the Senate. Mitch McConnell will line up his little Senate soldiers and they will vote for it. And Chuck Schumer can't wait to pass it because Ukraine is everything, right? Ukraine is everything. Murdering an entire generation of Ukrainian men is the most important thing that they can do. And yeah, they'll pass it and then Joe Biden will sign it into law.
Yeah, shutting down churches. Well, that's their agenda anyway. Is there any way to stop it, do you think?
Mm-hmm. If the American people, let me tell you something, Tucker, and I can't make this point loud enough. The American people can stop our government. They can. When they decide that it's important enough for them, when they realize that within 10 years, CBO has projected that we will be approximately $55 trillion in debt at the current spending levels. If everything stays the same, we're going to be $55 trillion in debt in 10 years. We are going to implode. If the American people finally decide they're tired of illegal aliens murdering them, they're tired of illegal aliens squatting in their homes, they're tired of illegal alien men raping children and raping women. Yeah, if the American people finally have had enough and say no, they can stop it. And let me tell you, Tucker, if the American people say enough of sending money to foreign wars and foreign aid and funding the murder of people in foreign countries and in countries we can't even find on a map most of the time, yeah, if the American people say they've had enough of that and they're able to engage in this and stop spending all their money on all their hobbies and being disconnected and refusing to look at the serious situation that we're living in right now, oh yeah, the American people have far more power than I have, and I'm a member of Congress. If they literally hold our government accountable and stand up and say, enough of this, and I think they should throw out every single elected official. I'm not kidding. Every one of us should be thrown out. This government is a failure to the American people, and I'm angry about it, Tucker, because I'm a mom. My adult children and that generation and your kids and our grandchildren at the current rate right now, they'll never be able to afford a home. They have no strong financial future, and they are going to be living and raising their own children in a country whose government has screwed all of us over. And that is the flat out honest truth, Tucker. And so, yeah, the American people could stop it if they really want to.
I hope that lion roars. I will say.
Okay, so I agree with her 100%. Like, we are only powerless to the extent that we allow ourselves to be powerless. And there are a lot more of us than there are people in government. And if we came together collectively, we quite literally have the ability to stand up to the elites and to change everything. But like we say on this podcast all the time, the only way to do this is to come together as Americans and not opposing political parties. It's us against the uniparty that controls our government. And I love that she said, get rid of everyone in Congress and start over. I think she's 100% correct on that too. And here's what's weird. I've been watching this Netflix documentary series called Turning Point, The Bomb in the Cold War. Have you seen this?
No.
It's very interesting, and I kind of think the whole series is swayed towards supporting Ukraine against Russia, but I'm on like the sixth. I think there's 9 parts, and I'm on the 6th part, and the director does a really great job of like presenting a comprehensive overview of all the events around the world that led to the Cold War and the aftermath of how many European countries were impacted by communism. And the episode I was watching earlier today was about how the people of Poland and East Germany changed the course of their lives and their government by these huge uprisings of the people against the oppression of their government. And we've seen this time and again throughout history. That's how nations fall. And the people always have the power to win when they come together collectively, but it's never without sacrifice. And I don't think Americans are ready to make these sacrifices because, as I repeat consistently, we're not uncomfortable enough yet to do that. But if we allow the uniparty to retain control, in the end, we're going to be sacrificing way more than we think.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that we do have power. I agree with what she said about vote everyone out. I recommend everyone do this. Like, pick your president and then everyone else vote out the person that's sitting there, because the longer they're in the system, the more corruption takes place. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's like, we need to recycle, like, we need to get through these people. There should not be career congressmen. They should be in there for like a term and then get out. I think that's like a huge, huge difference we can make. And then voting with our money too, how we spend our dollars. Like, everything they're doing, there seems to be a profit behind it. There's corruption. All these politicians are getting a piece of the pie. So if we start pushing back and not following their agenda and not spending our money on the things they want us to spend our money on, I think we can make a difference there too.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know this has had like my usual negative spin on everything, but since it's Friday,
I mean, how can you make it positive though
I
when like
know.
they're destroying this country?
Exactly. You can't. And like we can laugh about it, but it's still everything that is going on is horrific. And I I just don't know if enough people really understand that. But
Mhm.
let's end this on a positive note because it's Friday, at least a positive note for the people of Tennessee. So, in a follow up to a story that we talked about, I think it was last week, where Tennessee lawmakers were trying to do this bill to ban geoengineering releasing airborne chemicals, aka chemtrails. And it was in one chamber of government, but it just received bipartisan support. And so now all it has to do is be signed by the governor. And when that happens, it should go into effect on July 1st. And I didn't realize this, but I guess this would actually be the first bill of its kind to go into effect because there's similar legislation that has been introduced in Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Kentucky, Minnesota, and New Hampshire, but none of it has passed yet. So I say thumbs up to Tennessee.
That is great news. And I love that it's bipartisan support, like
Mhm.
actually something we can all get behind. And it's showing this is a real thing. Like they wouldn't be worried about it or censoring it if it wasn't something real, if it was just a conspiracy, right? So um that's amazing. That's really positive news. I feel like
Yes.
that is a win for just every single American. And now hopefully other states will follow suit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great way to end it on a good note, Tara. That's
Thank you.
awesome. Okay. Well, everyone have a great weekend, and we will see you back here on Monday. Thanks for tuning in.